I'm Marisa Silva. I'm a senior consultant at Wellingtone. But you are here today to talk about assurance and why is it so difficult to embed assurance? Why is it seen as separate from delivery? Why is it that despite our best intentions, despite the fact that we try to embed it, sometimes people just see it as something that they need to prepare for, that is not really a continuous activity, but more as a one-off event that they just want to get away from. So why is it that is something seen as separate? That's where we are going to start. So we are going to discuss some of the challenges associated with culture, and also I'll be sharing some practical tips as well as some examples of how you can yourselves start transforming your culture. In fact, I'm always fascinated, intrigued how culture is one of the elements that influences the most on how our projects are successful or not, and is one of the topics that even us working in assurance, as assurance leads, as part of the PMO, are sometimes not as brave as it could be in presenting that we have some concerns there. So let's be brave today and talk about that cultural element. So indeed, Peter Drucker, I'm sure you know the sentence, he popularized the sentence that culture, it's strategy for breakfast. Well, I have some news, not just strategy, it also eats our assurance, lovely assurance frameworks for breakfast. So some reasons on why, even in mature organizations, assurance can still feel external to delivery. It can be that the delivery teams just feel that they are being scrutinized, that we are trying to inspect them. Of course, this is not the case, and we need to position assurance as that critical friend, working with the delivery teams to understand how they can feel more supported. It may be something as simple as, for instance, preparing for the stage gates, which is a typical review type. So in that example, by working with the delivery teams, we are preventing the project from being stopped, from being put on hold at the stage gate. Or it may be something as simple as using the reviews, a project health check or others, as an opportunity to provide feedback. Often, the real risks of the project are not on documents, are not on your risk register. I'm sure you realize that by now. It can be that we are not getting the support that we need, or the commitment that we need from the sponsor. It may be that we don't have sufficient resources to support the project. So all those are aspects that can be identified as part of assurance and that will be seen as very positive by the delivery teams. Another factor that can lead to this scenario is when where assurance is just seen as a box-ticking exercise. And this happens also because of the box that you have there on the left, next to it on the right. The fact that sometimes we are too focused on outputs. So have you completed this section on this template? Show me that you have put this figure here where it is intended to be. Show me that you have used the right form for this change request, or that you have a mitigation or a risk that has been written in a certain format. Actually, that's not where the real trick is. We want to have assurance that, where people are, they feel safe in presenting the reality of their projects. And also, as a consequence, we are leading with intention for actions, not just for those outputs. So we want to focus on the influence that our assurance reviews, our assurance results are going to produce. And this happens even beyond assurance, by the way. I'm pretty sure you realize that, for instance, for something as simple as lessons learned, they are not often completed. They are documented, but that knowledge is not often transferred and shared. Why? Because very often what people realize, the delivery teams, is that we are not acting on what they are telling us. So therefore, it's just seen as a box-ticking exercise for the sake of compliance, rather than leading to those results. Another reason that we experience on why assurance is not embedded, is not assurance as usual, a concept that I really like, so not just business as usual, but also assurance as usual, is that assurance is not proportionate. And I even put that box in a not proportionate way to demonstrate it. So why do we have this, or what does this mean? This is a scenario where, for instance, we have projects of low complexity, low risk, and we are just killing the joy of working on that project with so much assurance on it. Or on the other hand, we may have a project that is tier one, that is highly risky due to the level of complexity, for instance, or to other factors, and we don't have sufficient assurance. So we need to identify what is that right balance in terms of the review types, in terms of the frequency, in terms of who to involve. There's nothing worse than being asked as part of the delivery team multiple questions that are just repeat by multiple assurance teams. Unfortunately, we also have a scenario sometimes where leaders are rewarding good news rather than honest reporting. They only reward the green ones. And if you are part of the senior management team here with us, this message is for you. We need to reflect on how do we want people to work with us. We need to encourage that honesty. Honesty is safe. That's the sign of healthy culture. That's the message that we want to share so that we can then surface the risks as early as enough. I once had a client actually where they identified that people were afraid of reporting the reality of their projects. And they were always falling for the middle end of the rag, the red and green. So always positioning their projects as amber. So they did something that was very brave, in my opinion, but really changed the culture of the organization. They removed the amber from the equation. So the moment the project was at risk, even if it was a minimum risk, people were encouraged to report it as such. In fact, the message was, if you have any issues, any concerns, do come to me as soon as possible, because I want to support you. I want to know if you need more resources. I want to know if you need more guidance, more support from the PMO. So let's change the narrative. And another reason is because assurance is not integrated or continuous. Very often is seen as something that is a one-off exercise, that it does not work incrementally, where we are learning from previous reviews and then following from it. So identifying if the actions have been implemented or not, if the recommendations have been utilized as they should. So because it is one-off, episodic, it's not exactly part of the delivery rhythm. And therefore, people may forget of the benefits of having assurance done in that continuous way. And also, by that, I don't want to mean that assurance needs to be a heavy exercise. Assurance, at the end of the day, is about providing confidence that our projects are on the right route. So that can mean something as simple as having a conversation over coffee, as participating on a retrospective or on a planning session to understand how the project is performing. So please don't think that this needs to be by being integrated, or even when we refer to proportionality, that it needs to be a heavy exercise with full report packs, etc. In fact, if we do ask who is providing confidence in the organization, I'm sure you'll then realize that there are many functions doing such activity, doing checks on contracts, on plans, on registers, on the design of the solution, etc. So all of them are contributing. What happens is that often they are disconnected. They are working in silos. And therefore, it's not that we are missing assurance, is actually that assurance may be perceived as not proportionate or is disjointed. So this idea of working towards an assurance culture rather than a compliance mindset is what we want to instill as part of this webinar. So rather than understanding the reviews as just a pass or fail exercise, if we involve assurance early, so dear project managers, work with us, because then we'll be able to see if your projects are at risk of being stopped at the stage gate. What can we do to prevent it getting to this point? So understanding what is the value to be taken from the review, preparing for the gate, rather than as, of course, being those gatekeepers or being perceived almost as those gatekeepers. In the same vein, rather than hiding the bad news, where we are then just going to turn into the end of the project with surprises, we want to raise those issues early. And I mentioned earlier also that very often the real risks are not in documents. They are extracted from documentation, from conversations. So that's exactly what we want to do. Have that open space, that safe space for people to come back to us for any concerns. And then often we tend to think that, or people perceive, let's put it this way, that assurance needs to be done just by the PMO or by the audit team or by a defined assurance team. Actually, if we want to have assurance as usual, we need to co-own assurance. We need to involve the different parties in the conversation. Let's ask for our delivery teams, what do they believe is proportionate? We are all grown-ups. I'm sure we know what makes sense for our projects or not, in a way that we have sufficient governance in place, but also allowing for our flexibility at the same time. It can be as simple as encouraging also self-assessments or asking for peer reviews as part of a project management forum. So in that case, the peers, the project delivery teams, other forums in the organization, other boards, they are all doing assurance. It's not owned exclusively by the PMO. So it's a shared mindset. So co-creating and co-owning assurance, asking for that feedback, treating assurance as a service to be provided, and therefore asking for that feedback would be critical for us to get to this idea of an assurance culture. So we saw what the lack of that culture looks like. Let's now see what embedded assurance looks like. And key message that I've been highlighting, it's not about adding more process, it's about changing the behaviors, starting those conversations. So assurance should happen with teams, not to those teams. This is a situation where the teams are so involved, they have been asked for their feedback on what good looks like, what should we do as part of ensuring that we are providing confidence to our stakeholders that the projects are going okay, without any trouble, that they then are going to ask for assurance themselves, asking for input. I have this situation over here where I'm not comfortable with the estimates that the team is giving me, or for instance, where the scope is unclear and I may need more definition. Could you help me? So they would be asking for that input rather than racing for it. So the reviews would happen in a much more natural way, like human conversations, rather than interrogations, following the script and having that tick box exercise perspective. As a result, too, the risks are surfaced early. I don't need to wait until I get into the stage gate to understand what is the reality of that project. And again, if we are considering proportionality, if we are focusing on conversations and creating those relationships, the behaviors, that means also that people would be feeling safe in sharing those concerns before they even put it in a risk register. And very important, assurance needs to lead to action. We don't complete assurance just because we like it as a hobby. We want to inspire better decisions in our organizations. So let's actually check if what we have proposed has been implemented and if it's driving better behaviors. So it shouldn't just be about completing a slide deck. It's about changing the behaviors, changing the culture. Something that I see happening a lot, not just in project management overall, is that I think we sometimes feel that culture is just something that exists and happens to us. But actually, it's something that we can influence. And we, working in assurance, we actually have a privileged view of what the culture of the organization looks like. We can see, for instance, how sponsors are supporting or not their projects, if people are feeling confident in reporting the reality of their projects or not, or what even is the level of capability of the teams. For the ones that don't know, by the way, the APM has a guidance document called Measures for Assuring Projects, where one of the criteria, one of those measures, it's even the culture of the organization. Organizational capability and culture, actually. So we need to be brave enough to flag any concerns and to also measure how the culture is impacting the projects. Do we have a culture that hinders the project or that enables the success of that project? Often the challenges are not on the capability or on the capacity side. They exist because of that cultural element. So let's do something about it. So, real example, a project that was always green and always late. Maybe you recognize some of those. And on the screen, you can see a watermelon. This is typically when in assurance, what we would call watermelon reporting. So a project that apparently on the outside is looking as green, until we then complete an independent review and realize that on the inside, it is bright red. Of course, that is not a situation that we want to get to. And in fact, if we have continuous assurance rather than that episodic assurance, would be able to see that trajectory, how the project is turning from a situation of being green in the start, from amber and then to red. So it have those early warning indicators and even a much more proactive view of assurance rather than just reactive, as is the case with this watermelon reporting. So this was a scenario where the project manager was reporting progress without any issues. So everything going okay. It was not challenged at all until then assurance, in this case as a function within the PMO, was involved and exposed optimism bias and also a quiet dysfunction, as you can see there on the slide. This optimism bias was even something that was not directly in control of the project manager. We were very precise. This was about an estimate for how long it would take for the contract to be signed on that specific project. And there were some questions around some lack of clarity around the scope. The design was not fully defined as well, or at least high level at that point. So the project manager, it was also a new person in the company, by the way. So he believed that the legal and procurement processes would be a bit quicker than they actually ended up taking. And what we in the assurance team identified was that actually based on previous projects, where we have also had the same scenario where we had to involve new suppliers, we identified that it would take more time than what was being presented by this particular project. So we have actually raised that concern. And actually the project manager was very grateful because this was a way of also safeguarding their own schedule, so to avoid impact later on. So by doing that, we actually created trust. Remember this idea of relationship and behaviors. So this is us helping you, dear project manager. So if in the future you are also unsure on, for instance, how an estimate may be correct or not, come to us, assurance, come to us, PMO. We may help you by looking into what are previous projects that have the same scope, for instance. So this not just protected the project manager, it also created that visibility to the project board. So of course, at the moment, this was a risk that had been identified, in that case, only after the review. But then for the next stages, the project was much more transparent. In fact, as you can see there on the screen, that transparency was rewarded. Everyone was quite happy that we have added, well, happy in the sense that that not turned into an issue later on. Of course, we had to adjust the schedule of the project, but we had much more confidence on what was being proposed as the real schedule for the project. It was a much more realistic proposition. So by creating that trust, we then have the teams coming back to us, asking for assurance, asking for our inputs. And it's ultimately about positioning assurance as support. Another example, which links back to this idea of proportionality, is, for instance, rather than producing a heavy report that sometimes, or a pack of slides in a slide deck that people often don't read fully, let's actually join a retrospective. Let's join a planning session if we are working in sprints. Let's extract from those conversations what we need in terms of seeing if the project is on track or not, if there are any concerns. So you don't always need to demand and chase the delivery teams. We should actually be more proactive and be part of the conversation, join those sessions as a way of creating that trust. Trust changes everything. It creates those new behaviors. So following from it, some traps that we have probably all seen at some point, only thinking about reviews or assurance as formal gates, not considering, for instance, that peer reviews, it's also a review type on assurance, that we can also have health checks, deep dives, self-assessments even. So continuous assurance instead is what we want to have rather than just assurance that happens at fixed points. Also, too much focus on documents. The teams just try to pass the reviews rather than really reflecting on, is my project still achievable? Is it viable? Is this still the right project to progress or not? So let's take one step back and reflect on the project overall. That's what assurance is there to do, to create that sense of benefit to be generated, of validating actually those benefits. So it's about focusing on the outcomes and the influence of our recommendations rather than just a pass or a fail exercise. Reports filed, not acted on. So as mentioned, we should be coming back to our recommendations and ensuring that actions are being implemented, that we are creating that impact from assurance. So not just about passing the test, it's about influencing an action. Assurance seen as a report, not a relationship. This follows pretty much from all the previous points. So the ultimate goal of assurance is to provide confidence, and that is not taken by a report. That is done by actually changing the behaviors. Of course, in the report, you should still complete the report. Of course, that's part of the review, but the way of how you are positioning your findings in order to influence the result is a critical aspect too. And then metrics over meaning. Sure, it's important that we do capture metrics to check if the project is on track, how we are spending the budget, etc. But what does that mean? What is the so what for the project? We have, say, a schedule variance or a budget variance of X amount. Would this put the project in risk? In the grand scheme of things, should we still continue this project or not? What is the opportunity cost of continuing this project and wasting organizational resources over doing another project in the portfolio? So remember, we have that privileged view to look into the full portfolio and being able to influence those decisions, or at least to flag and provide a recommendation. So some practical shifts, what helps? Being visible. And not just about joining the meetings, retrospectives, lessons learned, workshops, planning sessions, etc. The moment someone joins, let's introduce ourselves, explain what assurance can do for them. Even if they are not involved in the project right away, it's likely that they will be at some point, so they will know who to contact. Encourage openness. So we want, and if you are just in the beginning of your assurance journey, it's very likely that we are not going to have a perfect result. But we want to reward honesty. We want to reward those that bring us risks early, that ask for input. So let's share that as the practice that we want to sustain. And this, again, is a message for the senior management team in particular. Talk like a human. Of course, we do have guidance available from the APM, from NISTA, so the old IPA acronym, that provide us with some guidance on what to consider as part of a review. But actually, you don't want to just follow a script or use jargon. We want to understand what is the real impact. So having conversations do help in creating that trust. You can also use internal case studies. If you are finding it difficult to prove the value of assurance, let's focus on what has been our reality. Probably don't use one that is sensitive still, that is, it can cause open, a can of worms. But at the same time, reflect on how assurance may have helped, particularly if you have been involved at the right time, early. And don't just report, influence. The best assurance happens between the slides. It's about the outcomes and the impact that you are creating, how you are influencing the behaviors. So my challenge to you, just to finish, would be that reflecting on it, you identify what can you do in practice this week even, or maybe next week to start from a fresh period. What can you do to make assurance feel more like part of delivery rather than being imposed or less like a tick box exercise? Could this be just about having a chat with a delivery lead? Could this be about joining one of the next meetings? So those small things, those are the ones that make a big difference. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed the session, and do join us for our next community event happening next week already. Thank you all.